As we all know, in the last few decades, we have seen the prominence of religious extremism in Middle East. But especially after the defeat of ISIS, we have seen a little bit decrease in the overall power of religious extremists in this region. But now we have seen certain incidents that happened in the Middle East in recent times. One of them is the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, and the other one is the unfortunate sectarian violence that happened in Syria. So do you think this will create another resurgence of religious extremism in the Middle East?
Yeah, there is the real possibility that this is the case, that these conflicts will create a religious instability. The reason is when you have mass movements of people away from conflict, you also have an issue of where they're going to live, where they're going to stay, where they're going to reside in the future. And local populations also start to feel as if there are pressures on resources in their country. So when there is mass movement of people, there is the potential for conflict. And within the conflict, groups that want to use the conflict to gain power, like religious extremist groups, can come in and play in those situations. So the answer is yes. When there is major conflict, Syria, Gaza, and other conflicts, the movement of people can create tensions because local people believe resources are few, their space is few, water is few, and religious extremist groups can manipulate the power control situation at those points.
Yes. With your speech that we just listened, you actually made a point about international issues as being used by religious extremists in the Middle East region. But when you look into it, especially what's been happening since the 7th of October, the humanitarian crisis is so large that many say that it has to be taken as a bigger subject when you're talking about religious extremism, because these people in many cases are being motivated by the injustices they see in Gaza, in many other places. How much of a role do you think this plays? Aren't we in need of speaking about this more loudly?
Absolutely. Look, many people feel very angry about what's happening in the Middle East. Many people feel they have a grievance. They want to talk about it. We need to give people the space to be able to do that legitimately. First of all, that's important. But we will have extremist groups who will try to use this situation, whether they are religious extremists or whether they are far-right political extremists from Europe. Or even far-right religious extremists. So we have these groups who are trying to use these conflictual situations. But it's really important that for the public, they still have the space to be able to bring up their thoughts, because the more they are suppressed, the more those thoughts are suppressed and people are not allowed to talk, the more the grievance can move towards violent extremism. And so it's really important to give people the space and the platform. Second of all, we need to be very careful about which groups are starting to use these situations to create division. We need to tackle online those groups who are trying to create division by using these political situations. Third of all, we need to give the general public, the tools to also be able to dismantle the narrative, the stories that extremists can use to create division. And governments have a key role in giving empowerment to give people the knowledge and information so they can dismantle the stories that extremists use to try to create division.
Yes. When you look into the rhetoric in the not just the Western world, but also in Israel, the subject of this panel is always about extremism, and we are mostly talking about the Islamic extremism. But when it comes to the rhetoric in Israel, the religious rhetoric in Israel, they are pretty violent in certain spaces as well. And when you look in the Christian spaces, we are seeing a new phenomenon that's coming into reality, especially in the United States, that's called white Christian nationalists.
Yeah.
So Do you think that religious extremism is in the future, in the close future or far future, is going to be tied not just to Islam but to Christianity and to Israel and the Jews as well?
Yeah, look, religious extremism unfortunately is on the rise, and it will affect Christian communities. We are seeing some of that, as you said, in the United States. It will affect parts of Jewish communities vis-a-vis what's happening specifically by some on the extreme right in Israel in the political sphere. And we know that there is extremism also sadly affecting parts of Muslim communities. So this is not just a Muslim issue. Let's just be clear about that. Religious extremism is on the rise across a variety of religions. Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, these are all affected. Okay, so we are going to have to work upon tackling these forms of religious extremism across the board. We cannot deny they are growing across the board. So we need to look at new ways we can tackle that, by which we can also create connection points between people of different faiths, so that the middle ground, the people with commonality, sensibility, who want to live together, who want to exchange ideas together, who want to see a future together, are the voices that drown out those from any religious group who want to cause conflict, who want to cause division, who want to cause constant pain or humiliation to the other. That's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. When you were speaking a bit ago, you said something really interesting. When it comes to this extremism in the West, more specifically United Kingdom, you said that it's London that's financing this. Who is London? Who do you mean in England, in United Kingdom, that is behind the financing of this? Do you mean a party, an institution, a group, or a person?
When I mean financing of extremism in London, I'm talking about individuals. I'm talking about people who give donations. I'm talking about much more at a person-to-person level, because that's where it becomes difficult to track. Organizationally, it's a bit more easier to track. The problem is with some of the extremist groups is their ability to change name, shift into different company registrations, and then just basically change bank accounts and move like snakes in the grass. So it is mostly to do with private individuals, donations, etc. But also with some groups that use companies, but that's more rarer. But the problem is these people, these extremist groups, shift their names, change their registrations, and that's how they move around to bypass to bypass issues around tracking them.
During your speech, you also mentioned the Iraq War and how this extremist groups has gained popularity with the opposition of the Iraq War.
Yeah.
Do you think that when this invasion of Iraq started and every other toppling of governments in the Middle East continued, do you think that the Western involvement with the Middle Eastern politics has created a power vacuum that caused extremist group to rise into popularity?
I certainly think that the power vacuums created by conflicts in the Middle East have been one of the key elements that had given extremist groups the opportunity to grow. Where did ISIS come from? All right, ISIS came from an individual and a group of individuals who were involved in the repercussions of the Iraq invasion. They grew out of that conflict. When the government was fragmented and Saddam's government was fragmented, the opportunity arose that these individuals started to take leadership positions in fighting, in the military, in local civil distribution of administration. So power vacuums created by conflict, interference, and in the end, the Iraq war was illegal. It was an illegal war. Okay, and I am firmly of the view that that should never have happened. Saddam was a bad man. We needed to deal with him. But the post-Iraq invasion created the storm where these individuals came in and openly grew the extremist groups.
Last week, there was an attack on a neighboring country here to Qatar from Israel. and it created a lot of outrage in the Gulf states.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's going to cause a bigger break off with the Gulf and the West? Some of them even saying, especially in the Qatar, they might look for alternatives when it comes to security, rather than United States, considering that they let this happen. What is your opinion on this?
Well, international laws need to be totally respected. Okay, international laws need to be totally respected. The attack on Qatar was a contravention of international law. That is my opinion. The fact of the matter is, it has created a discussion within Middle East countries around creating a bloc, militarily, socially, and economically, as a form of defense. Look, we don't know where the tectonic shifts are going to go, but the reality is, if countries decide to take unilateral action, where is that going to stop? Where is that going to stop? People may not like a political organization in another country, but the international law has always said you do not go and fire off missiles into that country. You use diplomacy. And if we start becoming a series of nations that fire off missiles towards each other, in the end, conflict creates vacuums. Vacuums are filled by bad actors. Bad actors create more conflict. And so we must respect international law, particularly in the Middle East, given the history of conflict here and given the enormity of the conflicts. So the attack on Qatar should never have happened, in my opinion. If Israel continues to have a problem with Hamas being based in Qatar, diplomacy should have been the way forward. Because diplomacy is the only way we can stop armed conflict from happening. That is my firm belief.
When you look into the European countries, United Kingdom, France, Germany was also talking about it, but it seems like it's been postponed for now. They all announced that they're going to recognize Palestine. How do you think it's going to affect Middle East? And do you think if Israel follows the thread that they have shown, which is the annexation of West Bank in exchange of the recognition, what do you think the Western countries are going to do? Will there be a confrontation?
I don't think there'll be a confrontation between Western nations and Israel. I don't think there'll be a confrontation of sorts. There won't be. But I think there's a realization that something has to be done in relation to some kind of Palestinian state in the future. So France and other respective European governments are saying, is this the last chance that we can even develop a Palestinian nation in the future? In my opinion, it's a really, really difficult situation right now to even see a Palestinian state in the future, given what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. So do I think there'll be a conflict, armed? No, between Europe and Israel. Do I think that European countries are trying to push forward a future Palestinian state right now legally? Yes. Is there a realistic prospect of a Palestinian state is a question. I really don't even know. The land fragmentation is such that is there even a viable Palestinian state is a question we need to be looking at.
Last question. Do you think that with everything that happened since the 7th of October, and now we are seeing a potential rivalry between Israel and Turkey, and that there's a 12-day war between Iran and Israel, it seems that there's a lot of conflict brewing in the certain parts of Middle East. Do you expect a very large battle, very large war or conflict to start in the close future between these regional powers?
Well, I would have told you 10 years ago that we wouldn't be in this situation today. That's what I would have said. If you said, there'd be a major war, Qatar would be attacked, Gaza would be completely decimated, the West Bank would be cut off, and the potential of annexation of the West Bank, I would have said to you 10 years ago, you're crazy. So the answer is, we don't know. That is the troubling thing we're in today. We don't know whether there will be major conflict in the future. But I can tell you one thing. A conflict against Turkey would be disastrous for the Middle East. Turkey is absolutely a fundamental axis in the Middle East of some stability right now. So anyone trying to attack Turkey better think very carefully, because Turkey is not a pushover. And Turkey is a fundamental place of stability. I hope there's no more conflicts in the Middle East. But I say we as civil society and politicians need to send out the message that countries who think they can unilaterally attack who they want in the Middle East must be told this is not acceptable. That diplomacy is the only way. And if they continue to attack, then they must face some measure of sanction. Sanction in the sense of sending a message that this is not acceptable. I'm not talking about violent sanction, I'm not talking about military sanction. But the message must be very clear to any country sending missiles anywhere to each other in the Middle East. This is not acceptable in one shape or form. Not acceptable.
So Mughal, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
It was really nice.
Thank you, my friend.